On Wednesday, the eve of the 75th anniversary of the Allied invasion of Normandy, President Trump is scheduled to attend an event at the British naval base in Portsmouth, England, commemorating the battle. During a toast at Buckingham Palace on Monday, Mr. Trump alluded to the ties forged between Britain and the United States during World War II, saying the Allies defeated the Nazis and the Nazi regime, and liberated millions from tyranny. The bond between our nations was forever sealed in that great crusade, he added. Portsmouth played a part in Operation Overlord, the campaign to retake Europe from the Axis powers in World War II. Allied forces boarded ships bound for France at the port, Americans lodged in a barracks in the city, and injured soldiers were treated at one of the city's hospitals. After the event at the naval base Tuesday, Mr. Trump is scheduled to travel to Ireland, where he will meet with Prime Minister Leo Varadkar and travel to his golf course in Doonbeg, on Ireland's western coast. For the D-Day anniversary itself, on Thursday, Mr. Trump plans to go to northern France, where he is due to visit an American cemetery and then meet with President Emmanuel Macron. Last year, during a trip to France to commemorate the centennial of the end of World War I, Mr. Trump drew outrage for his decision not to visit a cemetery for American soldiers because of rain. Before each of his two trips to Britain since taking office, President Trump has stirred controversy in interviews with the British press. He has at least one more interview set for broadcast on this trip, with the journalist Piers Morgan. Last week, in an interview with the Sunday Times of London, Mr. Trump repeated his advice to Prime Minister Theresa May to sue the European Union for more leverage in her talks to withdraw Britain from the bloc, rattling the politics of a government that is already in transition. Mrs. May, having failed to secure a Brexit deal in Parliament, is resigning as her party's leader next week. In a separate interview, he commented on a member of the royal family, the Duchess of Sussex, also known as Meghan Markle. He told the tabloid The Sun that he had been unaware that Ms. Markle, an American former actress, had made nasty comments about him during the 2016 presidential campaign. "I didn't know that," Mr. Trump said. "What can I say? I didn't know that she was nasty." He added that he hoped she would make a very good princess. In a preview of his interview, Mr. Morgan tweeted that Mr. Trump had spoken again with him about the royal family, as well as about Winston Churchill, Brexit, climate change, and other subjects. President Trump has retreated from comments suggesting that a post-Brexit trade deal with Britain would include access for American companies to Britain's healthcare system, after the remarks immediately prompted outrage. During a joint news conference on Tuesday afternoon with Prime Minister Theresa May, Mr. Trump touted the possibility of a phenomenal trade deal, but he reiterated that everything would be on the table, including the country's National Health Service, more commonly referred to by its initials, NHS. That raised the possibility that Britain's health system could be used as a bargaining chip, possibly weakening it by creating a stronger market for private services and giving American pharmaceutical companies more power. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, denounced Conservative Party members in a tweet for entertaining the idea of negotiating over the health service. "They all need to understand, our NHS is not for sale," he wrote. Mr. Corbyn's sentiment was echoed by others in his party and across the political spectrum. The NHS is a government-financed system seen by many as a foundational institution of the modern state. Just hours after making his remarks, Mr. Trump seemed to walk them back in an interview with Piers Morgan on the ITV program Good Morning Britain. During the interview, which aired on Wednesday morning, he appeared to make a complete turnaround when asked by Mr. Morgan if he would consider it a deal-breaker if the NHS were not on the table. "I don't see it being on the table," Mr. Trump said. "That's something that I would not consider part of trade. That's not trade." President Trump began the third and final day of his state visit by taking aim with two caustic Twitter posts at an unlikely pair of high-profile critics, the performer Bette Midler, a washed-up psycho, and the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, a creep. The first post was about Mr. Schumer, a Democrat from New York, and came around 1 a.m. in London, where Mr. Trump and the First Lady have been welcomed with almost every courtesy imaginable by the royal family. Mr. Trump appeared angry at Mr. Schumer's suggestion that he might not follow through on a threat to impose a 5% tariff on goods imported from Mexico. Roughly 30 minutes later, Mr. Trump took on Ms. Midler, who had tweeted a debunked quote in which Mr. Trump purportedly called Republican voters the dumbest in the country. She deleted the post and apologized. But Mr. Trump, who has fought with Ms. Midler for years, did not appear to accept the apology. He turned to a familiar tactic he uses with female critics, questioning her sanity. Mr. Trump, who turned his sights on former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. later in the morning, seemed similarly distracted by feuds back home during a visit to Japan last month. This was President Trump's first full state visit to Britain, a rare honor for a head of state made over 2 years after he was first invited. Queen Elizabeth II and the royal family welcomed Mr. Trump to Buckingham Palace with an honor guard and artillery salute, followed by lunch, afternoon tea, a tour of Westminster Abbey and a lavish state banquet, at which the President and the Queen toasted each other. The President's 4 adult children arrived for the festivities, after more than a month of planning by White House officials to accommodate them and Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. Before he even landed, though, Mr. Trump stoked an old feud with London's mayor, Sadiq Khan, whom he called a stone-cold loser, and who later called him the poster boy for the far-right movement around the world. And on Tuesday, protesters, having prepared a statue and a blimp in Mr. Trump's image, gathered in London's streets to demonstrate against him, though seemingly in fewer numbers than the tens of thousands who protested his visit last year. On Tuesday, Mr. Trump traded ceremony for diplomacy, meeting with Prime Minister Theresa May to discuss a possible trade agreement, the Chinese technology firm Huawei, which the United States has called a security threat, and other issues. He also spoke with Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary and leading candidate to succeed Mrs. May as Prime Minister, and Nigel Farage, the right-wing, pro-Brexit politician whose upstart party did well in the recent European Parliament elections. Mr. Trump has been a critic of Britain's approach to Brexit, suggesting that it should be more aggressive in the negotiations. He took a more reserved approach on Tuesday, saying that he did not want to take a strong position. But with opponents of a withdrawal pushing for a second referendum, and the government having failed to come up with a plan that could gain Parliament's approval, he said of Brexit, "I think it will happen." Maggie Haberman, Mark Landler, Alan Uhas and Megan Specchia contributed reporting.